I love this shoe. It's from Brooks and it's called the Glycerin Flex. That last word, flex, is important to highlight for two reasons. First, Brooks offers 4 distinct models that include glycerin in their name. And while they all have their merits, the Flex is the only version of the glycerin that I believe offers certain unique benefits for runners over 50. And by that, I don't just mean unique within Brooks's running lineup. I mean unique across the totality of today's running footwear landscape. The second reason to highlight the word flex is that flexibility is at the core of what makes the Glycerin Flex so unique. Now, just a bit of context here. If you look it up, flexibility is defined as the ability to bend easily or without breaking, and as the quality of being easily adapted. I wanted to establish that because what makes the Glycerin Flex so potentially powerful for runners over 50 is not that the shoe itself exhibits flexibility, which it does, but what's important is that it promotes flexibility in its wearer, you. So, in other words, it can help develop in you the ability to bend easily or without breaking, as well as the quality of being easily adapted, both of which can help you become, or stay in, as the case may be, a stronger, healthier, and more resilient runner. I'll explain how it can do these things in just a minute, but first, I want to welcome you to We Run Over 50, where it's our mission to inspire more people over 50 to become runners over 50. My name is Ernest, and as you might have guessed, I am a runner over 50. I've also worked in and around the athletic footwear industry for over 2 decades, with most of that time focused on the creation of running shoes. I won't go into that history here, but if you want to learn more about me and my bona fides when it comes to running, I've included a link to a Get to Know Me video in the description below. And while I am a runner over 50, I am not a doctor. And the content on this channel is for informational and educational purposes only, and does not constitute medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before starting any new fitness program. That's really important. One last thing I need to address before we get back to our main topic is an error I made in our previous episode, in which I highlighted the best shoes for new runners over 50. In that episode, I indicated that it was Hoka that introduced the concept of a full-length rockered midsole in 2009. Well, I was wrong about that, and fortunately, a viewer with the screen name Tenti Metex was kind enough to write in with a correction. They wrote, "Fun fact, the rocker sole was actually invented by a Swiss engineer called Karl Müller with his health shoe brand called MBT. Müller spent years living with the Maasai in Africa and noticed that their feet rolled on natural earth. This rocker sole was then borrowed by almost every other shoe brand. It took them some time because he had a patent." I'm old enough to remember the huge splash that MBT shoes made when they were introduced to the US market back in the early 2000s. So I'm disappointed in myself for having forgotten that they were the first commercially available shoe to feature a full-length rockered midsole. A huge thank you to Tenti Metex for writing in with this correction, and please keep the comments, questions, and corrections coming, both here on YouTube and over at our Patreon community. Our Patreon members make these videos possible and get access to exclusive content, including ad-free videos, Q&A videos, and more. We'd love to have you join us. See the description below for a link. All right, with all that out of the way, let's get back to the Brooks Glycerin Flex. I mentioned that the shoe can be a powerful tool for runners over 50. It promotes flexibility in its wear, which in turn can help that wearer become a stronger, healthier, and more resilient runner. How does that work? Well, Brooks hasn't published any of their own research, but there is quite a bit of existing third-party research we can refer to. To start with, why does flexibility in the shoe matter? Well, in our video on the best shoes for new runners over 50, I spent a fair bit of time highlighting the 3 key ways our bodies change as we enter middle age, and the implications those changes can have on our footwear needs. The first of those changes I highlighted was the loss of elasticity in our tendons, including the Achilles tendon, which plays a vital role in each and every running stride. The Achilles is the thickest, strongest tendon in our bodies, but it is susceptible to injury. And as we age and our tendons become less elastic, our risk of Achilles injuries rises. In fact, as I noted in that video, Research shows that Achilles tendinopathy, which is chronic pain in the Achilles, is the most common running-related injury experienced by runners in middle age and older. But those of us entering our 50s are not all destined to just crumble away from our Achilles on up. A study published in 2017 by a team from the German Sport University of Cologne found that the aging Achilles tendon appears to be capable of increasing its stiffness in response to 14 weeks of mechanical loading exercise. There's one thing I need to explain here. I mentioned just a minute ago that we lose elasticity in our tendons as we age, including in our Achilles tendon. That might lead you to assume that stiffening of the Achilles tendon is a bad thing. But there's important nuance here because stiffness is core to the function of the Achilles tendon. A stiffer Achilles will transmit force from the calf muscles to the heel bone more quickly and directly. So we want the Achilles to be stiff and also elastic, like a strong, taut spring. Unfortunately, as we enter middle age, for a range of reasons, both the stiffness and elasticity of our Achilles declines. It becomes less effective as a spring. And yet, as that German Sport University of Cologne study revealed, this decline in both functional stiffness and elasticity can be mitigated in older adults through exercise. To be specific, the participants in this study were women between the ages of 60 and 75, and the exercise intervention undertaken by the experimental group in the study was maximal isometric voluntary ankle plantar flexion contractions, a real mouthful, performed while seated in a custom-made device that measured the amount of force each participant applied. For anyone unfamiliar with seated ankle isometric plantar flexion, this video from Premier Rehab and Performance gives you a look at what that entails.
The way to perform this movement is you're going to be seated in a chair with your foot resting on the ground. What you're going to do from here is you're going to think about pushing the first half of your foot into the ground as if to try to replicate the movement, but you're not actually going to move. So it'll look a little something like this. You will feel increased tension and your muscles working in the back through your calf.
Coming back to the Cologne study, it showed that compared to the control group that did not undertake the exercise intervention, after 14 weeks, the experimental group exhibited 23% higher Achilles tendon stiffness, 20% higher Young's modulus, which, to simplify things, we can take as a measure of Achilles tendon elasticity, and a 22% increase in the strength of the calf muscles. So significant gains in function at the Achilles and calf, showing that as folks in our 50s, 60s, and even 70s, we're not consigned to a future in which we're limited by gimpy Achilles tendons. A highly simplified way to put this would be to say that when it comes to the health and performance capacity of our tendons as we age, we need to use them or lose them. They need to be appropriately stressed. As to what an appropriate level of stress is, the study's authors noted that it has to be ensured that the exercise intervention implements tendon strains corresponding to high mechanical loading, intensities of at least 80 to 90% of maximal to induce tendon adaptation. And it just so happens that according to a separate study led by a team out of Finland, the Achilles calf complex works at approximately 84% of its maximal capacity while running in traditional running shoes. Compare that to walking, where the same structures are taxed to only about 35% of their maximal capacity. So this tells us that running can offer unique benefits to people over 50 when it comes to building, or at the very least maintaining functional stiffness and elasticity in the Achilles calf complex. One thing I really need to emphasize here, though, is that this stressing of the Achilles and calf must be undertaken thoughtfully. For example, in the German Sport University of Cologne study that I've been referencing, the participants were closely supervised. The training load was increased gradually over time, and each session included a mandatory warm-up as well as rest intervals between sets. These people weren't just pulled in off the street and forced to max out their Achilles tendons at the drop of a hat. Yes, the research tells us that our tendons need to be appropriately stressed, and the level of stress they require is quite high. But especially for us folks over 50, that stress must be applied in a gradual, planful way that includes sufficient time for recovery, or else we're just going to get injured. All right, to recap the ground we've covered thus far, we lose both elasticity and functional stiffness in our Achilles as we age, decreasing our performance capacity and increasing our risk of injury. But we can mitigate and to a degree reverse that loss through the appropriate application of stress to the Achilles. And it turns out that running, done planfully, can be a great way to apply that appropriate level of stress over time. That's fantastic, right? Run, and we can keep our Achilles calf complex strong, healthy, and resilient through our 50s and beyond. Well, there's a fly in this ointment in the form of the so-called super shoes and super trainers that have exploded in popularity over the past few years. This ASICS Super Blast 3 being a prime example of a super trainer. With their exceptionally tall, inflexible, and rockered midsoles, they've literally changed the shape of running shoes. And research has shown that they truly can make running easier, which is great. It's probably not possible to quantify this, but I believe super trainers in particular are at least in part responsible for maintaining the momentum of the current boom in running participation.
According to the fitness app Strava, global participation in run clubs jumped about 60% last year. And the London Marathon just shattered a world record as more than 1 million people applied for its 2026 race, nearly double the number from 2 years ago.
How would you describe the running landscape today?
Booming. One word, booming.
Just to clarify, the distinction between a super trainer like the ASICS Super Blast 3 here and a super shoe like this Nike Alphafly 3 is that the former terminology, super trainer, has come to be used to describe footwear that's intended for distance training, while the latter, super shoe, has come to be used to describe footwear that's intended for distance racing. So it's a difference of degree and not of kind. Both super trainers and super shoes feature ultra high performance foams with, as you can see here, very tall, inflexible, rockered midsoles. And the ultimate intent for both is to make running easier by enabling the wearer to use less energy to run at a given pace. In technical terms, to improve your running economy. But, and there are always buts, there are potential downsides to this super footwear, particularly for runners over 50. To simplify things, I'm going to focus primarily on super trainers from this point on, but the same principles apply to both. All right, in terms of those buts, first at an acute level, in that video highlighting the best shoes for new runners over 50 that I've referenced a few times already, we also spoke to age-related declines in balance and the associated increase in fall risk that starts at middle age. I've not seen any concrete data on this yet, but it seems very likely that the stiffness and towering midsole heights characteristic of super trainers will exacerbate this increased fall risk. So that's one potential acute downside of super trainers for runners over 50. In terms of longer term risks, and this is also conjecture on my part, but informed conjecture, I worry that super trainers may contribute to chronic underloading of the Achilles and calf. As noted in a study published in the Journal of the American College of Sports Medicine in 2024, the reduction in energy absorption and generation at the ankle joint appears to be the predominant mechanism for overall metabolic savings in super shoes. So less work at the ankle, which reduces loading on the Achilles and calf, which in turn reduces the total energy cost of running at a given pace. This finding is now well established and has been reproduced across several other studies. So the question isn't whether super shoes can make running easier. They can for most runners. Instead, the key question for us folks over 50 is whether super shoes and trainers reduce loading at the Achilles and calf so much that it falls below the threshold for tendon adaptation. Recapping the key figures here, the intensity of Achilles strain required for positive tendon adaptation is 80 to 90% of maximal. And as reported in that study out of Finland I cited a minute ago, the Achilles strain associated with running in traditional non-super footwear is about 84% of maximal. So right within that narrow band of positive tendon adaptation. The question this leaves us with is, would a super trainer drop Achilles strain below the 80% intensity threshold for tendon adaptation? Based on my own experience running in super trainers, I believe the answer is yes. And if correct, that would mean a person over 50 running exclusively in super footwear would no longer experience the positive adaptations in their Achilles associated with running. For younger adults, this is a non-issue. Research tells us that functional declines in the Achilles begin at middle age, roughly in our mid-40s. But for those of us in middle age and older, it suggests that we may not want to spend all of our time running in super shoes or super trainers. And this is where the Brooks Glycerin Flex re-enters the picture. While most of the industry is zigging to capitalize on the popularity of super trainers, Brooks is zagging in a big way with the Flex. I should note that Brooks does offer super shoes and super trainers, but no other mainstream brand currently offers a shoe like the Glycerin Flex. As you can clearly see, the shoe is, as its name suggests, very flexible along its length and width. As I mentioned earlier, though, what matters is not that the shoe itself is flexible, but that it promotes flexibility in its wearer by allowing the foot to move through a wider range of motion, particularly at the toes and ankle. Why would you want this? Well, this flexibility allows your feet, and consequently the entirety of your body, to move more naturally, the way your body innately and uniquely wants to move. This same principle was what drove Nike to introduce a shoe called the Nike Free 5.0 way back in 2004. And I have an original example of those 5.0s here. As I mentioned in our first video, in which I shared a bit of my running history, Nike Free enabled and inspired me to become a runner. Prior to the Free 5.0, I had tried on multiple occasions to take up running, mostly out of a sense of obligation. It just seemed like one of those things you were supposed to do, like eating your vegetables. But invariably, within a handful of runs, I'd get injured. From really bad shin splints to pain and swelling in my knees, these ailments led me to assume that my body just wasn't cut out for running. But then, kind of on a lark, I bought these Free 5.0s back in 2004. And one run turned into 2, then 3, then runs every other day for a month without pain. And that's when my life changed. I realized that those injuries I kept experiencing, they weren't because my body was incapable of running. They were because I was running in shoes that were preventing my body from moving the way it wanted to, the way that I, as a unique individual, was born to run. Once I unlocked my natural motion, I was able to run consistently and without pain. And what had been an activity that I dreaded became one of the joys of my life. This realization that a pair of shoes could fundamentally change the way your entire body moves, well beyond what's happening at foot level, is also what drove me to join Nike as a footwear product line manager, where I would eventually lead the creation of the Nike Free Run franchise, and then take on a role leading innovation for natural motion concepts across all footwear categories at the company. See our first video if you want to learn more about that. I'll include a link in the description. I bring this up not to toot my own horn, but to explain why I feel so passionately about footwear that can help you unlock your natural motion. And this isn't just about subjective impressions. There's copious research showing that shoes that are highly flexible along their length and width and feature low to moderate heel ball offsets can significantly change running mechanics compared to conventional footwear. For example, a 2005 study conducted once again by a team out of the German Sport University of Cologne found that the Nike Free 5.0 increased range of motion at the metatarsophalangeal joints and at the ankle joint compared to a traditional running shoe. Not a shocker, right? You'd expect that given how flexible Nike Free is. But what hadn't been shown previously was that this increased range of motion was linked to significant strength gains in the tendon muscle units associated with both of those joint groups. Quoting from the author's conclusions here, the capacity of those muscles which were more intensively used by the Nike Free 5.0 increased significantly. I think the fundamental concept here is pretty intuitive and circles back to what we highlighted earlier. When it comes to the health and performance capacity of our tendons, we need to stress them. In other words, use them or lose them. And this is particularly important for people over 50. But it's nice to know that there is research substantiating our intuition. Now, this is going to be controversial in some quarters, but there is also a fair bit of high quality research indicating a limit to the quote unquote natural stresses our bodies can handle. For example, a 2013 study authored by a highly respected team of sports scientists from the University of British Columbia, along with Australia's Griffith University, found that there was a higher likelihood of injury with minimalist footwear compared with a conventional neutral shoe model. And this was despite the fact that study participants were exposed to the minimal footwear conditions gradually over the course of 13 weeks. A separate study, also conducted in 2013, but in this case by a team out of BYU, found that over the course of a 10-week program in which a control group trained in traditional running shoes, while an experimental group gradually transitioned to running in minimal even 5-finger shoes, like these, they found that the VRUM group had a significantly greater incidence of bone marrow edema after the training period, where increased bone marrow edema signals stress injury to the bone and is viewed as an early warning indicator for fractures and ligament injuries. And the margin here was not small. 10 out of the 19 subjects in the VRUM group were classified as injured at the end of the study, as compared to just 1 out of the 17 subjects in the control group. What all this tells us is that for runners over 50, there is an optimal window of loading for our feet and ankles. Too little, and we don't get the positive tendon and muscle adaptations that we need, particularly at the Achilles and calf. But too much, and we significantly increase our risk of injury, including injuries to our tendons and bones that can be very slow to heal. And this is why I'm such a big fan of the Brooks Glycerin Flex. Based on the 50 miles and counting I've logged in my pair thus far, I believe the team at Brooks has crafted a shoe that makes it easy, you might say natural, for us older runners to train within that optimal window of loading. Yes, it's highly flexible along its length and width, and it does feature what we would classify as a low heel ball offset, but at 6 millimeters, that offset is by no means flat. And the Glycerin Flex offers copious cushioning with a broad base across the forefoot, midfoot, and rear foot. Taken together, these ingredients result in a shoe that won't amplify your stride in the way that a stiff, highly rockered super trainer might. But on the flip side, it won't make every stride feel like a chore either, which I found to be the case in most minimal shoes. All right, with all that background established, I think it's time to talk through the Brooks Glycerin Flex using our We Run Over 50 review framework. And I'm going to insert this foot skeleton model to help illustrate some concepts along the way. Now, to start with, at 9.3 ounces in US men's 9 and 8.1 ounces in the US women's 8, the Glycerin Flex is on the lighter end of average for a daily trainer. For context, the standard Glycerin is 15% heavier than the Flex, and the Glycerin Max 2 is over 16% heavier. So the Flex is, by a wide margin, the lightest version of the Glycerin that Brooks offers, and you really can't feel the difference. As I mentioned a minute ago, the Flex features a 6 millimeter heel ball offset, meaning that your heel sits 6 millimeters higher than the ball of your foot when you're standing in the shoe. And this is lower than Brooks has historically gone in their daily trainers. As I explained in our guide to the best shoes for new runners over 50, a lower offset can promote a flatter, more natural foot angle at initial contact, and that in turn can promote a more inherently stable foot strike. A lower offset can also increase loading at the Achilles compared to a shoe with a higher offset. And in the case of the Glycerin Flex, I think this was a very intentional choice on the part of the team at Brooks. They wanted an offset low enough to stress the Achilles to a degree that would promote positive adaptations, but high enough to avoid excessive strain for most runners. Based on my testing, I'd say they've managed to thread that needle. And this is coming from someone who generally prefers a heel ball offset in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 millimeters. When it comes to the forefoot profile, I would describe the Glycerin Flex as featuring a moderate forefoot rocker. But because the shoe is so flexible, you're not going to just roll through toe off as you would in a super trainer, such as the Asics Superblast. Instead, as we discussed earlier, you're going to extend through the metatarsophalangeal joints at the base of your toes, which is going to work and develop the intrinsic tendon muscle units within your foot. Then, as you plantar flex your foot relative to your ankle to propel your body forward, this motion here, you'll work your Achilles and calf to a degree that you would not in a super trainer. In fact, if you're new to running or have been running exclusively in super shoes or super trainers, your calves may feel sore after your first few runs in the Glycerin Flex. That tells you that they're working in a way that they haven't been, and also highlights the importance of giving your body time to adapt to a shoe that's as unconventional as the Glycerin Flex. Just like you wouldn't start a weight training program by trying to bench press 300 pounds straight away. If you're not already accustomed to running through a wide range of motion, it's vital that you build distance and intensity gradually in the Flex. All right, so this flexibility is great for building capacity in your foot and ankle, but it probably goes without saying that it's not so great if you have a condition that limits mobility at your toe or ankle joints. In other words, the Glycerin Flex is not a good choice for folks with big toe stiffness, aka hallux rigidus, or a condition like ankle equinus that limits mobility at the ankle. Okay, if joint mobility is what sets the Glycerin Flex apart from super trainers, what sets it apart from minimal running shoes like the Vibram 5 Fingers or even Nike Free is cushioning. Because minimal shoes are, as the name of the category suggests, built to be minimal, their midsoles are intentionally low and unforgiving compared to traditional running shoes. By contrast, the Glycerin Flex features a moderate heel stack height of 36 millimeters. And its midsole is comprised of the most advanced foam technology Brooks uses in their daily trainers, something they call DNA tuned. I found DNA tuned to be just okay in the standard version of the Glycerin, but it really comes to life in the Glycerin Flex, offering cushioning that genuinely feels soft and springy. I think the highly segmented, podular nature of the Flex's midsole allows the foam to engage more dynamically than it can in the standard Glycerin's more monolithic midsole. When it comes to balance, with its flexibility, low heel ball offset, moderate stack height, and wide base along the length of the foot, the Glycerin Flex inspires confidence. I'd say it's absolutely worth putting on your short list if fall risk is a concern and you place a premium on cushioning. Now, when it comes to our changing feet, this is one area where, in my view, the Glycerin Flex falls short. First, I think a lot of people, and particularly people over 50, are going to dismiss the Glycerin Flex without even trying it on because it appears quite narrow. In reality, its knit upper is very stretchy and will accommodate a wide range of foot shapes, but people have to be willing to try it on to find that out. I think Brooks really missed an opportunity by not building the Glycerin Flex on a more foot-shaped last. For example, here's a model from Ultra, which is the brand most associated with foot-shaped running shoes. And it's easy to see how much broader and foot-like it is across its toe box as compared to the more conventional, highly tapered toe box of the Glycerin Flex. Now, Ultra's toe box may be a bit too broad, but I think a nod in this direction would have been truer to the ethos of the Flex than its current rather narrow shape. A more foot-shaped toe box would have also put more space between the Glycerin Flex and the standard Glycerin from a merchandising perspective. As it stands, I've heard from some running retailers that their shop decided against carrying the Glycerin Flex because it seemed too similar to the standard Glycerin. In industry parlance, they saw the two shoes as a pick-em, and in those cases, buyers typically stick to the known quantity. This is a real shame because I think the Glycerin Flex is one of those shoes that will win you over as soon as you get it on your feet. One other thing worth noting here is that the Flex is only offered in a medium width. That's not a surprise given that it's a new model, but I fear it's just another reason a lot of folks who could benefit from the shoe might not even consider it. All right, coming back to the function of the upper, I mentioned that it's made of a stretchy knit. In addition to being elastic, that knit structure is also quite dense. This should help with durability, but I worry a bit about heat and moisture retention through the hotter months. All of my runs thus far have been in cooler weather, so I can't yet speak to this from experience, and it may be a complete non-issue. Just bear it in mind if you live in a very hot, humid part of the world. One final upper-related issue I think is worth noting is that the outer edge of the Flex's tongue has a tendency to curl under itself, specifically along the lateral or pinky toe side of the upper. As such, I found that after putting on the Flex, I often had to slide a finger between my foot and the outer curled edge of the tongue to get it to lay flat. Not a huge issue, but it was consistent, and I thought it was worth highlighting for anyone who might have challenges with finger dexterity. Okay, moving beyond the upper and to arch feel and overall support, the Glycerin Flex feels very natural underfoot. As I mentioned earlier, its midsole is quite wide, including under the arch. But it's also obviously highly segmented, allowing it to move as one with the foot, even though the midsole is moderately thick. In addition to flex along the length and width of the platform, the Glycerin Flex also offers an unusually high degree of torsional flexibility. All of this contributes to a ride that's smooth and inherently stable, more stable than I think a lot of folks are going to expect. One really clever feature that contributes to this stability is related to that torsional flexibility I just mentioned. This is getting a bit technical, but this S-shaped midfoot groove is engineered to flex asymmetrically. By this I mean that it opens up freely to allow the natural inversion of the rear foot at initial contact, but then as you transition to mid-stance and on through propulsion, it begins to lock up to inhibit exaggerated eversion or excessive inward rolling of the foot, all with no secondary stiffening structures that could get in the way of your natural foot strike. As a shoe geek, I just love this kind of thoughtful engineering. When it comes to orthotic accommodation, I rate the Glycerin Flex as average. Its sock liner is removable, as you can see here, and is a bit thicker than the norm, both of which are pluses. But if the reason you use an orthotic is to limit mobility in some way, the Glycerin Flex is probably not the right shoe for you. Now, the last thing I want to comment on is the use case for the Glycerin Flex. What is it for? Brooks describes it as being for road running, everyday runs, long runs, workouts on the run, or at the gym. In other words, a daily trainer. And I think that for newer runners or folks who run 2, maybe 3 times per week for, say, a maximum of 6 to 8 miles per run, the Glycerin Flex can be a phenomenal daily trainer. Assuming its medium width works for your foot, the shoe's upper and midsole both offer exceptional comfort over and underfoot. As I mentioned, the wide dynamic platform that underpins the Flex also offers a surprising degree of support. And what makes the Glycerin Flex so unique is that you get all of this in a shoe that genuinely feels like an extension of your body. There are minimal shoes out there that do also feel natural, but they lack the cushioning and support offered by the Flex. On the other hand, there are maximal shoes and super trainers out there that do surpass the Flex when it comes to cushioning and support, but they can't match its flexibility or the liberating feeling you get when it's your body doing the driving instead of the shoes. And speaking of driving, the closest analogy I can think of here is learning to drive in a manual transmission vehicle versus an automatic. And this is conjecture on my part because I actually don't know how to drive stick, but everyone I know who does tells me that they love it because it makes them feel more connected to their car and to the driving experience.
They just feel that much more connected. You're going to enjoy it if you like your cars, I promise you.
And this may be self-delusion, but I also consistently hear from these folks that the experience of learning to drive a manual helped make them better drivers. In this scenario, the super trainers that quite literally do some of the work for you are the automatics, whereas the Glycerin Flex is the manual, albeit a very modern version of a manual. And as we discussed in the setup to this review, by letting your body move through a wider range of motion and do a bit more of the work itself, the Glycerin Flex helps make you a better runner. Where by better, we mean stronger, healthier, and more resilient. All that being said, I wouldn't recommend the Glycerin Flex for runs farther than about 8 to 10 miles at a time. The pronounced segmentation of the shoe's midsole is core to its appeal, but I found that once I got about 8 miles into a run, I could start to feel pressure or point loading from these discrete pods pushing through the footbed. And by about 10 miles, that pressure would become pretty distracting and borderline uncomfortable. Now, your mileage may literally vary on this, but I think some degree of point loading is an inevitable side effect of this uniquely podular midsole design. Okay, so the Glycerin Flex is a great choice as a daily trainer for newer runners or those who run 2 to 3 times per week for up to 8 miles per run. For more experienced folks logging 4 or more runs per week, you're probably already doing different kinds of runs. For example, 1 long run per week, 1 higher intensity session, and at least a couple of easy runs. And you probably already use more than 1 pair of shoes. Maybe you have a pair with a lot of cushioning and support for your long and easy runs, and a second speed-focused pair for your higher intensity sessions. If that sounds like you, then I think the Glycerin Flex can be a great choice for your easy runs, which most experts will tell you should comprise the majority of your weekly running volume. The conventional wisdom on easy run shoes is that they should offer plush cushioning, a high level of support, and basically allow you to run on autopilot. A prime example of an easy day shoe is actually one of the sister shoes to the Flex, the Glycerin Max 2, but I found that shoe ponderous to the point of being unrunnable. Prior to my experience running in the Glycerin Flex, my choice for easy days was the original Puma Mag Max, which you can see here. An attribute that most easy day shoes share is a thick, broad midsole that provides lots of cushioning and guides your feet to a degree that lets you run with your brain switched off. And I think it makes intuitive sense that you'd want a shoe like this for your easy runs so that you can take a load off, both in terms of impact and range of motion. But if you're doing all of your other runs in a super shoe or super trainer, which is becoming increasingly common, that means you're never getting that loading you need in your feet and Achilles to promote positive adaptations in your tendons. The sorts of adaptations that will mitigate or even reverse the loss of elasticity we experience as people over 50. That's why if you are an experienced runner over 50, I'd strongly encourage you to buck conventional wisdom and consider the Glycerin Flex as your easy day shoe. I transitioned from the Mag Max to the Glycerin Flex for my easy runs back in February, and even though I'm running more miles per week than I ever have before because I'm training for a marathon at the end of May, I feel better than I ever have before. Coming back to that definition of flexibility that I shared at the very beginning of this video, the Flex has developed in me the ability to bend easily or without breaking, and the quality of being easily adapted, things that I wasn't getting from my conventional easy day shoe. One last thing I'll note here is that I absolutely love the Glycerin Flex for hill work. The flexibility of its platform means that compared to a stiff super shoe or super trainer, you're getting so much more toe extension and so much greater purchase on the ground, which, at least I find, enables me to push off with much greater power. It just feels so much more satisfying, and I think I get more out of those workouts. So hill sprints and hill repeats are an additional run type I'd recommend the Glycerin Flex for. Okay, I think I've probably beaten the drum enough by now. While it's not a perfect shoe, and there are issues that could be showstoppers for some, particularly when it comes to fit, I really do believe the Glycerin Flex can be a powerful tool for runners over 50. At a time of ascendance for stiff, propulsive super trainers, the Glycerin Flex zags and reminds us how great it can feel to be the driver instead of the driven. And, look, I'm not a Luddite. I actually love super shoes and super trainers, but I also recognize that as a person over 50, I need to use my tendons or I'm going to lose them. Now, I could do Achilles specific strength training to get that tendon loading I need, right? That German Sport University of Cologne study I've cited numerous times proved that. But if your life is anything like mine, you know it's hard enough to find time just to run. So it's a huge win-win to be able to get the loading I need from the easy runs I'm already doing. And that's why I love the Brooks Glycerin Flex. All right, I hope this has been helpful for you, whether you're an experienced, new, or aspiring runner. And if it has been helpful, I hope you'll give it a like and share it with a friend. Liking and sharing will let YouTube know that there is an audience of, let's say, mature folks out there who are hungry for content like this. And please don't hesitate to post questions or feedback in the comments. That's a great way for us to learn together. Finally, if you want to see more from us, please do subscribe, or better yet, join our community of like-minded people over 50 who are becoming runners over 50 over on Patreon. I've included a link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and happy running.